So I want you to picture a 17th century Japanese rap battle.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, and it is loud. It's highly competitive. Everyone in the room is drinking heavily, shouting over each other, and throwing down these verses, trying to instantly outsmart the person who just spoke.
Wow, that is not the vibe I usually associate with Japanese poetry.
Right. I mean, contrast that with what you probably think of when I say the word haiku. If you're like most of us listening, you immediately go back to like third grade.
Oh, absolutely. Sitting at a tiny desk.
Exactly. Sitting there, counting on your fingers, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables.
Yeah. It always feels like a rigid little math problem disguised as literature.
It really does. You write something about, a leaf falling, you make sure the syllables add up, and boom, you hand it to your teacher.
Clean and solitary.
Yeah, clean, solitary, and let's be honest, kind of predictable. But today, I want you to completely forget everything you learned in elementary school about that finger counting game.
Throw it right out the window.
Exactly. Because for this deep dive, we are looking at Jane Hirshfield's brilliant essay, Seeing Through Words, Matsuo Bashō. And our mission today is to discover how a 17th century wanderer took that loud, competitive, sake-fueled party game.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And he transformed it into one of the most profound psychological and spiritual tools ever created.
It's honestly a staggering transformation.
Right.
And to really set the stage for you listening, I mean, imagine a backdrop of fading autumn leaves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ancient ink script unrolling on parchment.
I can picture it.
The stakes for Bashō weren't just about writing pretty poems to pass the time or, winning a drinking game.
No, not at all.
His ultimate goal was to completely renovate human vision and language. He wanted to use this tiny microscopic verse form to dissolve the millimeter-thick boundary between the self and nature.
Which is such a massive undertaking. And I know he ended up as this wandering, enlightened sage, but where does a guy like this even start? Because nobody is just born a wise, weather-beaten ascetic, right? Was he always this austere?
Oh, not at all. Not even close. And to really understand the profound spiritual shift he goes through, we first have to look at the rigid, highly social world he was breaking away from.
Right, the 17th century equivalent of the corporate ladder.
Basically, yeah. He was born in 1644 in a place called Ueno, and he came from a family of low-ranking samurai.
Okay.
But they actually had to farm just to make ends meet. So he's situated right on this really strict societal fault line.
Ah, so he's kind of stuck in the middle.
Exactly. But his early life is entirely marked by intense trauma. I mean, he loses his father when he's only 12 years old.
Oh, wow. I mean, that is a massive destabilizing event for a kid, especially in a rigid feudal society.
Immense. And then, he goes to work in a local, much higher-ranking samurai household. And while he's there, he becomes incredibly close with the Lord's son, a young man named Todo Yoshitada.
And they connect over poetry, right?
Yeah, they bonded fiercely over it. And some historical accounts actually strongly suggest they were lovers.
Oh, right.
Yeah. But then tragedy strikes again.
Mm-hmm.
When Bashō is just 22, Yoshitada suddenly dies.
Oh, man. So by 22, he has lost the two most important anchors in his life.
Right.
How does a young guy even begin to process that?
Well, that profound loss acts as a massive catalyst. It triggers what the essay actually compares to an Amish wilding period.
Wait, like Rumspringa?
Exactly like that. Bashō essentially plunges into a deep dive of the sensual world. He samples absolutely everything life has to offer.
Because he's grieving.
He's grieving, he's restless, and he just throws himself into the social scene of the city.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because this is where the 17th century rap battle stuff comes in.
Yes, the party scene.
Right, the poetry scene he was throwing himself into wasn't a bunch of guys sitting quietly by a pond reflecting on life. The dominant form was renga, or linked verse, and it was essentially an interactive multiplayer game. You'd have these groups of poets drinking sake. Somebody would throw down a starting verse, and the next person had to instantly cap it with a connecting verse that shifted the meaning entirely.
It was so fast-paced.
It hovered right between art and a competitive sport. In fact, the word haiku literally originates from a term meaning playful verse.
And what's really fascinating here is how Bashō's participated in this. He mastered it, but eventually he looked at this party game and realized it was actually an instrument of unfathomable brevity.
Unfathomable brevity. I love that phrasing.
It's great, right? Amidst all the cleverness and the drinking, he saw a hidden mechanism.
Okay, what do you mean by a hidden mechanism? Like, how does a party trick become something profound?
It really comes down to juxtaposition. So in a linked verse game, the spark happens when one poet's verse collides with the previous poet's work.
Right, the friction between the two ideas.
Exactly. And Bashō realized that if you strip away the social performance, strip away the party atmosphere, you could put two contrasting images side by side within a single tiny poem.
Doing it all yourself.
Right. You don't tell the reader what to feel. You force their brain to literally jump the spark across the gap between those two images. He saw that this tiny form could capture a single moment's precise perception with incredible depth.
But to actually harness that depth, the party couldn't last forever, could it?
No, it couldn't.
Because Bashō had this restless, what did he call it? A windswept spirit.
Yes, a windswept spirit.
Clever wordplay wasn't going to heal his grief, so he does something pretty radical.
He completely abandons his societal path. Just drops it. He leaves the poetry circles, moves to Edo, which is modern-day Tokyo, and seeks a life stripped totally bare.
Getting away from all the noise?
Yeah, he takes on these ordinary, grueling jobs, like he works in the offices of the city water distribution company for a while.
Just a day job.
Just a day job. But ultimately, he chooses absolute poverty.
Okay, let me clarify that for a second, because I think it's an important distinction for us to make. His poverty wasn't an accident, right? It wasn't a failure to succeed in the big city.
No, not at all. He actually had wealthy students. He could have lived very comfortably as a famous teacher if he wanted to.
But he chose poverty deliberately as a tool. The text actually calls it his honing stone for the sharpening of awareness.
Oh, that's the perfect way to describe it. A honing stone. And it's during this time that his followers actually build him a little thatch-roofed hut to live in.
A little sanctuary.
Right. And outside of it, they plant a Japanese banana tree, which is called a bash tree.
Ah, there's the name.
There it is. Now, this tree has these incredibly broad, sweeping leaves that are very easily torn by the wind. And it doesn't bear edible fruit in that climate. It is, functionally speaking, useless.
Useless.
Yeah. And he identified so deeply with the fragility and the useless nature of this tree that he actually took its name. He stopped being a samurai, and he became Bash.
Wow, he literally names himself after a torn, useless leaf.
Yes. And that hut and that fragile tree, they become the crucible for his mature aesthetic, which is deeply rooted in two interconnected concepts.
Sabi and Wabi.
Exactly, Sabi and Wabi. So Sabi is the beauty of the withered and the lean. It's best exemplified by his massive breakthrough poem from 1680. He writes about a crow settling on a leafless branch in the autumn nightfall.
Let's look at the mechanics of that poem for a second, because you have a stark black silhouette of a notoriously unglamorous bird.
Not a pretty songbird, yeah.
Right, a crow. And it's set against the fading light of a dead tree. There's literally nothing conventionally pretty about it.
Precisely. The mechanism of Sabi works by forcing you to look at autumn's diminishments. So an ordinary ugly bird, the dying of the light, and you find an aesthetic thrill in it.
It's leaning into the decay.
Yes. When you can look at that and feel beauty as much as loss, the feeling of loss itself is unpinned. The sadness actually becomes aesthetically beautiful. That is Sabi.
And then there is Wabi.
Right, Wabi, which is the beauty of ordinary, impoverished things.
Which brings up a really visceral example from the essay. He has poems where he talks about chewing dried salmon on a snowy morning, or drinking bitter ice shards from a gourd, referring to himself as a mud rat.
Mud rat, yeah.
And I think for you listening right now, imagine your own modern equivalent of this. Imagine sitting in a freezing studio apartment eating cold leftover ramen.
Sounds awful.
Right. The natural human reaction is to feel miserable. So what is Bashō doing here? I have to ask, is he just romanticizing his own suffering? Does stripping away your material wealth actually give you a superpower for observation? Or is this just like misery tourism for a guy who voluntarily chose to be poor?
That is the exact tension. And honestly, it's a very fair critique from a modern perspective.
Right. It's easy to judge.
Exactly. But the text reveals the underlying logic here. This was a deeply conscious Zen and Shinto practice of non-attachment. By embracing wabi-sabi, he wasn't wallowing in self-pity, and he certainly wasn't acting like a tourist in his own life.
So what was he doing?
He was turning the chill of impermanence into high art. Zen tools are about discovering what can be known when the world is looked at with entirely open eyes. He wasn't ignoring the cold or the hunger. He was moving so deeply into them that the suffering transformed into a crystal clear awareness of the present moment.
Wow. So if he found this incredible crystal clear perfection in that little banana leaf hut, why didn't he just stay there?
That's the question.
Because why give up the spiritual perfection he just painstakingly built? As I understand it, once he stripped down his physical life in Iyo, he found he physically could not just sit still.
Right, because the inward shedding of his ego demanded an outward, grueling physical journey. You can't just arrive at enlightenment and sit on a cushion forever.
Right, you have to road test it.
You have to test it against the friction of the world. So in his 40s, and keep in mind, his health was not great, he took to the road.
Which is late to start wandering.
Very late. He covered 20 to 30 miles a day by foot and horseback. This culminates in his famous 1,500-mile journey, which is recorded in his masterwork, Narrow Road to the Deep North. He fully embraced the philosophy that the journey itself is home.
And we really need to emphasize the physical realities of this journey. He didn't view himself as some heroic, conquering explorer.
No, not at all.
He literally referred to himself as a weather-beaten skeleton. He wrote a poem about setting out on the road, saying the wind penetrated right through to his heart.
Just feeling every bit of the elements.
Exactly. He felt completely exposed to the danger, the exhaustion. But that absolute exposure is the mechanism that led to his mastery of objective perception. This is the era when he writes the poems that literally changed world literature.
We have to talk about the Old Pond poem.
Yes, please.
Old Pond. Frog leaps in. The sound of water.
It's so famous, and it's only a few words, but it mechanically stops time in your brain.
It really does. Look at how the juxtaposition works here. You have the ancient static silence of the old pond. Right. And then you have the sudden kinetic energy of the frog leaving. And the collision of those two things produces the acoustic result, which is the sound of water.
Ah, he doesn't say the splash startled me.
Exactly. He just places the objects in your mind and lets your brain experience the splash itself. And then there is the cicada poem. Silence. The cicada's cry soaks into stone.
Oh, the synesthesia there is incredible because the sound doesn't just echo off the rocks. He describes it soaking into a solid object.
Because the boundary between the ephemeral sound of the bug and the permanent ancient stone dissolves.
They become one thing.
Yes. And by extension, the boundary between the observer and the scene dissolves too.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Reading his poems from this period operates like sensory VR.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
There's this one moment detailed in the essay where he's visiting a temple and he writes about deep-rooted leeks being washed white in an icy winter stream. And Jane Hirshfield points out that when you read it, the coldness literally enters your own hands. You feel the icy water.
You really do.
How is he doing that with just ink on a page?
Well, that sensory VR, that transference of physical feeling. Yeah. That is the ultimate goal of his haiku. It's permeability.
Permeability.
Yeah. He is using words to make the boundary between you, the reader, and the object being observed completely vanish it. Bashō famously told his students, to learn about the pine tree, go to the pine tree.
Just be with the tree.
Exactly. Meaning you don't impose your human ego, your metaphors, or your emotional baggage onto the tree. You empty yourself out and you let the tree speak through you.
Which drastically shifts how we are supposed to view literature entirely.
It does, yeah. Because he essentially predated the poet T.S. Eliot's famous theory of the objective correlative by like 3 centuries.
Which is the idea that describing a specific physical object will evoke a specific emotion in the reader without the writer ever having to explicitly name the emotion.
Precisely. Bash wasn't telling you he felt cold and spiritually pure on that winter morning.
He didn't have to say, I am cold.
Right. He showed you the crisp white leaks in the icy stream, and the architecture of the poem forces your own nervous system to feel the cold and the purity.
That is just brilliant. But even with all that profound spiritual depth, wandering around being a deep, permeable, weather-beaten skeleton can actually become its own kind of trap.
Yes, it can.
Because you can get too attached to being the wise old sage. You can become a caricature of yourself. So the final phase of Bashō's life required him to shed even his own hard-won seriousness.
Yeah, the spiritual journey doesn't end with austerity. Around age 50, Bashō became completely overwhelmed by his own fame.
He's a celebrity at this point.
Pretty much. He had constant streams of students seeking his wisdom, societal obligations, people just wanting a piece of the great master. He actually wrote to a friend that he felt like a monkey wearing a monkey's mask.
Oh, man, like a street entertainer just doing the same enlightened tricks over and over again for the crowd.
Exactly. He realized he was performing his own identity.
So what does he do? He goes back into lockdown?
He does.
He famously shuts his brushwood gate. He literally cuts through the morning glory vines that had grown over it, bolts the door, and shuts out the entire world to reset his mind.
Total isolation.
And when he finally emerges from this isolation, he brings forward his final philosophy, which is karumi, or lightness.
Lightness. He instructed his students to observe the world the way a clear, shallow river runs over a sandy bed.
Amused. Unattached.
Crystal clear, yeah, but without the heavy depths of his earlier sorrow.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit. Wait, locking yourself behind a gate, shutting out your friends, and just floating over reality like a shallow river. Doesn't that cross the line from lightness into just being completely detached and apathetic to the real world? It almost sounds like he's giving up.
I see why you'd say that. It can definitely look like apathy from the outside, but it's actually profound acceptance. Apathy is a defensive numbing, right? Kurumi is a radical openness.
Okay, how so?
You see it in the humor that suddenly floods back into his work. For example, there's a poem where a thief visits his hut at the end of the year. The old Bashō might have written a dark, Saibi-soaked meditation on the loss of possessions.
Right, mourning the state of the world.
But the new Bashō just finds it kind of funny because the thief is looking around and he has literally nothing to steal.
Oh, he wrote a poem about the thief forgetting to steal the moon in the window, right?
Yes, that's the one. Or there's another poem where he looks at a muddy melon smudged with morning dew and just sees this perfect, cool, uncomplicated beauty in it.
It doesn't need to be deep.
No, it doesn't need to be a grand metaphor for suffering anymore. It's just a melon.
Which makes me think about how we age. Think about how many of us become heavier, more rigid, and more cynical the older we get.
We collect grievances.
Exactly, we collect strong opinions. But Bashō actively worked to become lighter, more amused, and more childlike the closer he got to the end.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this lightness, this kurumi, was essentially his psychological preparation for death. He was practicing the ultimate letting go.
Preparing for the end.
Yeah, and we see the culmination of this incredible arc on his actual deathbed. He is surrounded by his weeping students. The mood in the room is incredibly heavy, solemn, and sorrowful.
Which is to be expected.
Right. So Bashō wakes up, sees a swarm of autumn flies gathering on the shoji paper walls of his room, and he genuinely laughs. He tells his students the flies seem happy about the unexpected gift.
Wow. Finding genuine humor in the flies, waiting to consume his own body. That is peak Kurumi.
It is the ultimate vanishing of the ego. He completely unpinned the sorrow from his own mortality. He didn't see himself as a tragic figure at all. He saw himself as part of the ecosystem, and he was amused by the mechanics of it.
So if we pull all the way back, look at the incredible arc we've traced here. He starts in the sensual, sake-fueled rap battles of a young, grieving samurai. He strips his life down to discover the bleak, sharp beauty of wabi-sabi in a rickety, wind-torn hut. He throws himself out onto the road, becoming a wandering skeleton whose ego dissolves into the natural world.
A completely wild journey.
And finally, he arrives at a state of pure, unattached lightness, laughing at the flies on his deathbed.
And the most vital takeaway for you, listening right now, is that Bashō's haiku are an invitation to practice this yourself. You are meant to be a co-author of the experience.
You complete the circuit.
Exactly. The poem isn't finished until the spark jumps across the gap in your own mind. They aren't just syllables to be analyzed on a chalkboard. They are active instructions on how to unshackle your mind from absolute stories, rigid opinions, and heavy boundaries. They teach us that the boundary between ourselves and the rest of the world is truly only a millimeter thick.
Jane Hirshfield's essay leaves us with one lingering reflection that beautifully captures this. Bashō once compared his own poetry to a fan in winter or a stove in summer.
Which is such an interesting metaphor. On the surface, that implies art is completely useless. A fan in winter doesn't keep you alive. A stove in summer doesn't cool you down.
Right, they don't serve a practical survival purpose.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, it points to supreme intensification. Bringing something into a poem intensifies the very experience of being alive, which leaves us with something really fascinating to think about today. Look around your own life. What useless things, the things that don't pay the bills, that don't advance your career, that society might see as a torn banana leaf, might actually be the exact tools that intensify your existence.
It completely reframes what holds value in our daily routines.
What are the things that truly connect you to the vast, permeable world around you? So the next time you hear the word haiku, don't count the syllables on your fingers. Look around, find your own muddy melon in the dew, get out of your own way, and just let the world speak.